John Rule, what have you been writing lately, Chief? You got something new to read for us?
Yes, this is a memoir of our arrival in Harrison in early 1942. We had left the beginning of the early part of World War I and come up from the Gulf from Mobile when a submarine and a patrol plane fought it out down at the mouth of the bay or down in the Gulf. And Dad, the job was over painting Berkeley Field, and Dad said it was time to go back to the Ozarks, best place for us. So he brought us up to Harrison in early 1942, and then we went on to the home farm in eastern Kansas and then came back a few months later. This is Harrison, 1942. They reached Harrison in the night, drove through a silent half-lit square, and crossed the bridge over the noisy little stream. With low apologies, T.M. woke the man who looked after their trailer parked in his side yard. They piled out sleepily, opened the stale-smelling trailer, and went to sleep with army blankets on bare cot mattresses. T.M. was up and out first next morning. He brought them a box of cornflakes and milk from the local dairy plant, then left in the car to scout for a place to live. He found one a mile or two downstream at a place called the Springs. He hitched up the trailer again and drove them out there. Ab Clapper, the talky farm owner, had his house in a large barn on the ridge above the Springs, the house highest, the barn lower on the county road. The road dived down in a curve beyond the barn and passed between the two spring outflows, made for the creek, then dodged uphill behind another rocky knob. A tiny dell opened by the smaller spring. In it, T.M. parked the trailer parallel to the spring flow. Right by the cleft in the steep rocky bank where the spring boiled out stood a tall, hollow red oak stub. T.M. cut a door hole into the stub's hollow about 4 feet up so Dagwood the coon could use it as a den. He ran a clothesline wire from the stub down the rippling brook to another tree and snapped Dagwood's lead to it. This allowed the coon to seek out crawfish in the spring run. Finally, T.M. stuffed a bed of dry leaves into the oak's hollow. This beautiful locale delighted the family. The whole setup pleased Jay totally. He ran across the road to the stream from the main spring where the lesser one joined it. A low concrete dam had a ramjet gravity pump below that sent water up the hill to the farmhouse. He ran down the spring brook to where it plunged into the small river nearby, Crooked Creek. A shaded sandstone ledge made a perfect place to fish from. He ran back to the dam and stared into the pool, cold, glass clear, and a few feet deep. Several big sunfish swam up to him and hung suspended, eyeing him warily. He ran back across the sandy road to tell of his discoveries. After the muddy waters of the Kansas farm country, for Jay it was sheer joy to wake each morning in the shaded hollow, aware of the cold spring flow bulging out by the hollow oak stub where the coon slept. He would wake early and slip out while steaming mist still hovered on the water. The coon might be out already, hunched over with chin and masked face above the surface, pumping shoulders as he felt for crawfish in crevices. At times, the coon would be still in the hollow oak, a curled ball of silver-tipped fur, the barred tail fluffed above his face. Jay would peep in and give his imitation trill of Dagwood's call to bring him out. Then he would unsnap the chain lead and take him across the road to fish in the larger run, where willow roots made lots of crawfish dens. A sudden storm dropped grainy snow on everything. It soon began to melt. Jay's dad met a neighbor up the road who said he'd show them how to grab suckers from the creek with a pole and hook. T.M. and Jay met him at the creek, a short, jaunty man who carried a stout bamboo cane with a line nearly as long and a large white bead above a big barbless treble hook. They walked down to a shallow run over smooth bedrock. From the ledge where they stood, they could see a school of white suckers in the current. The neighbor swung his line above the fish, let the white bead drift down under the nose of the fish, then heaved up strongly. The flapping fish burst from the water. The man pivoted and dropped the fish into the snow behind, flipped the line to release the hook, and swung back to catch another. After 8 fish lay in the grainy snow, he strung them, said, "That's how you do it," and walked off. T.M. gave Jay a wry, humorous look, and they went home. weather changed, green-up time arrived, and all growing things burst out. His dad came in with green marbles, gooseberries, and Vida made a pie from them. Jay really liked it, even if it reminded him of the green grape pie in Texas. Jay caught several big red-eyed rock bass from under the rock ledges at the creek. He began to trust the coon more, especially after an incident in the night. Dagwood somehow slipped his collar sometime late and came into the trailer, merely opening the screen door, which was unlatched. First he found and cut open a bag of the hoarded sugar in a kitchen cabinet. He ate some, then decided to take a nap. Jay woke violently from a deep sleep, leapt out, and threw back the covers of the bunks. The shiny eyes of the coon peered up at him from a large hole he dug out of the cotton mattress beneath Jay's feet. Jay got his parents up. They sat in the kitchen and laughed at the coon, who sat slumped against the wall like a little man and played with Jay's hunting knife. That the coon sought him out instead of running off gave Jay some faith that the coon was tied to him by months of petting and feeding. Jay took time to study the coon every time he had it out. He was surprised to notice almost human, not always admirable behavior. When Dagwood caught a crawfish, he would rub it several times between his black palm paws before crunching it down. But at times, feeling and reaching back in root holes beneath the willows, he would leap from the water and dance about on hind legs, yeeking and chattering with a large river crawfish clamped to his slender fingers. As soon as he flung it loose, he would dive on it where it lay flipping on the gravel, kill it with an audible crunch, and abandon it. This display seemed to indicate that to a coon, a crawfish had no right of self-defense. On a warm morning, some weeks after they reached the spring, someone yelled, "Hey, Bud!" as Jay stepped into the sandy road. He just snapped the coon back to his wire and was headed for the creek to fish. He turned his head and waited uncertainly as three strangers came down the hill road from the barn. The first was a grinning black-haired man younger than Jay's dad, with a brunette woman who might have been his wife and a blonde girl about Jay's own age, or a bit older, lagging behind. The grown-ups looked rough and careless, but okay. The younger girl, maybe a sister to the woman, looked thin and poorly cared for. "Hey, son, hey, buddy," the man said as they came up to where Jay stood balancing his pole in one hand. "Is there some place here we can get to the creek where somebody can swim or get in the water?" He flashed his teeth at him in another big smile. Jay stared at them. They must be strangers or newcomers, all right. What were they then, hobos off a train or something? "Oh, yeah, well, yeah, sure," he finally responded, and then turned and pointed. "Right down there. I'm sure Mr. Clapper wouldn't mind. People go there all the time. I'm going back to fish. I'll show you." He led them to the footpath off the road curve and down the spring branch until they left the willow shade and came onto a bar of piled gravel that jutted into the creek. Here the current made an S-curve and headed right back for the ledges where Jay loved to fish. "This is all right here," he said, and pointed to the rushing milky current near them. "We had a big rain, so you can't see the bottom, but it's only chest deep to me. It's okay for swimming." He wondered if maybe they had swimsuits on under their clothes. "Oh, we ain't going in ourselves. It's just for her." The man grinned and nodded at the shy young girl who still lagged behind. "She just feels like she needs to get in and wash off." "Yeah, go ahead, sissy," the dark-haired woman urged. "It's okay." Jay turned away and waded across the surging riffle off the bar. He felt the force tug gravel under his tennis shoes. He climbed out on the far bank and padded to a half-buried log in a drift of dead leaves. He usually found worms here and squatted to dig, but glanced back and was stopped with the sight of a slim, coltish girl. She dropped her skirt on the clean gravel and now stepped clear of it. She kicked off her scuffed cloth sneakers, slowly unbuttoned her thin blouse, shrugged out of that, and dropped it atop the skirt. Now her only covering was a worn pair of panties in ugly pink. She was already nearing the height and frame of a grown woman, but still had no swelling to her breasts. She seemed poorly nourished. The circles around her nipples seemed dramatically large and dark against her visible ribs. She hesitated, then moved toward the rushing water. Her hips seemed slimmer than her shoulders. Her whole effect was a shy and virginal, slightly knock-kneed grace. Jay's cheeks burned. At any time he would be ashamed to stare like this, but her awkward charm held him spellbound. He forgot himself. Facing down current, she waded in slowly to thigh depth, then slowly deeper. She stayed mostly erect, with spine straight, as she stooped slightly to splash water on flanks and arms, always staring blankly ahead. Then she crouched a bit to caress shoulders, chest, and the prominent, still furrowed nipples. A wave of mingled pity and hunger rose at Jay. He felt confused and angry. Wasn't there anyone better to take care of her than those two? What kind of family were they, anyway? Abruptly, he came to and turned back, digging with fingers in his hunting knife beside the rotted log. He found a few worms for his hook. After a moment, though, he couldn't help glancing back. She was already wading out. Sunlight glowed on her wet skin. The nearly transparent rayon clung to her girlish nates. She tried briefly to dry with the tail of her blouse, but gave up and slipped into the two thin garments and her shoes. A moment later, all three left on the path to the road. The dark-haired man turned for a final wave and smile. Frowning, Jay waded back and walked a few paces to the first low bluff. He leaned against the fibery bark of a big cedar and let his line and hook go in slack so the eddies would take it beneath the ledge. Then gazed unfocused at the wavering fish line. Since they came back to the hills, all these new feelings about girls really nagged at him. Mr. Clapper's youngest, Susie, dogged him at times, wanted to show him the barn and things. She was girlish enough, despite her knit cap and jersey shirt and boy's overalls. She was a tomboy, but could never be mistaken for a boy. Everything about her was better, smoother, and lighter, and he sensed that she was really nice. Absolutely not the same way he felt about tanned and freckled Willie Lou, a year older and a grade ahead in school. Yesterday, coming from school down the gravelly road in spring heat, she invited him to come over as they neared her house. I have to be home all by myself Fridays and Saturdays. It's not much fun waiting around till my folks get home at dark. She laughed a little throaty laugh. He felt slightly curious, intrigued. What would we do? She threw him a wide-eyed glance, flushed a little, and laughed again. Oh, there's lots to do. We'd figure out something. Jay suddenly had an uneasy feeling that he wasn't ready for this something. He glanced over the field toward the caves and bluffs where he would lead his coon that night. Well, I can't right now. I have to be home early to lay trails with my coon for Mr. Clapper to show off his hounds. He has men coming from Springfield to maybe buy some. He says he'll give me a $50 a trail. And that sounds like a lot of money. Bye. She tossed her head and flounced up the steps to her yard. But the worst was last weekend. He was fishing at the bluff again when the two older Clapper girls came by, one walking, one riding one of their girls, led by an older boy, a high school boy. And they went along the path by the creek curve. Later they came back with the other girl riding and turned up the hill to the barn and the house. Then a bit later the high school boy came down where Jay was and began to tell him terrible things about how he could do anything he wanted with those girls, anytime he wanted, taking turns and the like. Jay just stared at him, then at the ground, shocked and disbelieving. Why was he doing this? Why bother to say it all to him, a kid? It must not be true. Jay's deal with Mr. Clapper to lay trails at Dagwood so Clapper could show off and sell his hounds soon ended because of Jay's attitude. Instead of cooperating, he wanted to defeat the dogs and embarrass Clapper. He worked hard to lay difficult, involved trails, doubling back and crossing water, hopping rocks, walking up slanted logs and trees, and jumping off. Finally, one night, he felt he'd defeated them. He felt he'd really accomplished something when he picked Dagwood up near Clapper's drive, walked down to the trailer in the dell, and snapped the coon's lead to the clothesline at the spring. His pride and satisfaction grew as the evening wore on, and he heard no hounds at all nearby. At bedtime, he checked Dagwood's den. He was pleased with himself again as he peeked in and saw his pet curled and asleep in the leaves. Far off, he could hear a faint bell or two from the puzzled hounds, still working out the trail. They'd never had this much trouble before. He said nothing to his folks about it and went to bed happy. It may have been after midnight when a terrible racket woke him. He jumped up and ran outside. Dagwood was in the spring flow. Dogs bellowed from the bank and edged into the water. Lights followed the hounds down the hill. Clapper and his dog buyer sports from Springfield. When the coon saw Jay in his pajamas, he ran out of the water and straight up him, perching painfully atop his head. Clapper was giving tongue and laughing happily on the far bank. Figured out they had to follow that kid to get the coon after he picked him up and ended the trail. Pretty damn smart hounds I raised. Doesn't surprise me one bit. Suddenly the hounds lunged through the water and surrounded Jay, baying and leaping. Dagwood slipped and clawed Jay's scalp. Jay reached up to steady him. Quick as a flash, the coon laid open the heel of his hand. Somehow he got the coon into the house through the melee. The hounds and the hunters retreated up the hill, Clapper still loudly praising the products of his dog breeding. When all was still again, Jay put the coon back in his tree trunk. He was bitter and never used the coon to lay a trail again. Had Dagwood thought he would throw him to the dogs? Jay didn't believe the hounds had it figured out. The house was so close that any air current could carry the scent up the slope. It was Clapper's idea from the first to sell his dog. Jay didn't really want to do it, just the money. Now he was aggrieved at Clapper, felt betrayed by the coon, and felt guilty for his momentary anger when his hand was sliced. His dad reacted mildly. We probably shouldn't have bought one taken after his eyes opened. You did save him from the dog. You can't expect animals to act like people.
What year was that?
That was not the early 1942, and I was 11.
11 years old.
Yeah.
What a life, John. What a life.
I've had an interesting